Hi, we're talking about Your Money Matters on NDTV Profit, and my name is Mathew. This show gets you insight on everything personal finance related, and that means that sometimes we have to talk about uncomfortable subjects as well. And the subject that I've chosen today is something that will hit close to home for a lot of people because the numbers of divorces are going up in India. We'll talk about, most importantly, what the rules on alimony are. We'll talk about prenuptial agreements, which has been a concept that is mostly associated with the West, but increasingly young couples are contemplating it at the very least. To talk about everything associated with divorce and settlement and everything that you need to know, I'm joined this evening by Aditi Mohoni, who is a family lawyer. Thanks so much, Aditi, for taking the time. It's not the easiest subject to speak about, but anecdotal evidence suggests that there are more cases now than there were even a decade or two back. Is that something that bears out in the numbers?
Hi, thanks so much for having me. Yeah, absolutely. I think you're very, very right about that. What's happened is post-COVID, there's been a huge shift in how family operates really in India. And I think this could be attributed to, husband and wife spending long hours in confined spaces. You see a lot of new marriages where couples are, barely married for a couple of months, maybe within a year, who are now deciding to split. So that's pretty prevalent at the moment, and we're still dealing with the backlog of that even today.
And do the cases usually take long to find a solution? And is it a solution that is often found outside of the court? I'm talking about out-of-court settlements, or is it more often that you're seeing that it drags on in court?
So it's interesting because what happens is usually when the couples are younger, they kind of want to move on at the earliest. So you'll see a lot of out-of-court settlements happen in their case. Many times, though, if you're not able to arrive at that monetary sum, you will see matters then getting litigated. Now, we all know that litigation in India is a prolonged process. One has to understand that the entire framework of even family courts came into effect in 1970s, 1980s. We have about 7 courts to deal with the entire jurisdiction of Mumbai up to beyond a little bit beyond Andheri. And that becomes a little tedious because the burden on the courts is absolutely astronomical and they aren't able to deal with the number of matters there are today.
So therefore, it's understandable that cases tend to go on. I take the point of young couples wanting to move on, and incidentally, this is also a very key demographic shift from what you saw maybe even 20, 30 years back, where in most cases now, both parts of the couple or both individuals are working. And so therefore the concept of alimony becomes a little more complicated. And that's the reason really we're talking, part of the reason why we're talking about that on our show today, because it relates to money. How does alimony get decided, Aditi?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. When it comes to alimony, one has to take into account several factors, all right? Now, understand the court is very clear that alimony is not a dole simply to be handed out. The spouse who requires alimony has to be able to substantiate his or her claims in terms of why they require that amount and what that amount is. So when I say substantiate, it basically means that you have to prove your claims. Now, for marriage, as you may be aware that we're governed by personal laws unless the marriage is registered under the Special Marriage Act. As per these laws, usually maintenance is only reserved for the woman, with the exception of the Hindu Marriage Act, which extends that privilege even to the man. To be able to substantiate your claim for maintenance, you need to provide bills, you need to provide, any kind of proof of standard of living. It could be photographs, it could be pictures of vacations, medical bills, and so on and so forth to corroborate your claim.
Okay. So, and when you're talking about documents, is there anything that is codified in terms of a list of documents, or is it anything that you will find substantial to prove your case?
So what happened in 2019? We had a very, very significant and very landmark judgment that came about. It was the Rajneesh versus Neha judgment. So let me just paint a quick picture prior to 2019. What would happen is in the event, or let's say a woman agitates a claim for maintenance, she would go to court and she would file an application for interim maintenance to start with. To be able to prove that she requires interim maintenance and to showcase that the husband has a particular lifestyle or a particular income, she would have to ask for documents from the husband to be able to corroborate her claim, in addition to substantiating it with her own evidence. So in 2019, with this judgment that came about, this entire step was eliminated. What the court said was husband and wife both have to produce and file a very comprehensive affidavit of assets and liabilities. That is going to list down basic details and even beyond in terms of what assets you own, what properties you own, what was your income a year prior to marriage, what is your income a year prior to filing for divorce, what is your current income. So it's very, very detailed. It's the husband and the wife, both of them, who now have to furnish this affidavit in court. This has made it a little bit easier because earlier we would really have to file that application for production, then argue it. The husband or wife would not come to court with clean hands, documents would be withheld. So this has sort of eliminated that to a large extent.
Okay. The judgment that you're speaking about, Rajneesh versus Neha in the Supreme Court in 2020, it seems like a landmark judgment. Is this something that you refer to or the court refers to often when it's deciding on alimony?
100%. And what the Supreme Court has actually gone a step beyond and has given us a format in terms of what that affidavit of assets and liabilities is going to look like. So it has details to the extent of what phone you have, what watch you wear, as specific as that, to be able to ascertain that standard of living.
Now, when it comes to the actual numbers, assuming that an individual, and here in this case, as you pointed out, based on the act that you have used or under which you are married, both parties have a claim, the husband and the wife. So how does that number get determined, Aditi?
Okay, so to correct you there, it's only under the Hindu Marriage Act that the husband and wife both have a claim. Everywhere else, it's only reserved for the woman. Now, to decide how that number is going to be calculated, unfortunately, there's no formula. A few years ago, I think in 2017, there was a judgment that came about which said about 20 to 25% of your spouse's income is what you would be entitled to, subject that you are able to prove that you require alimony. Now, how it is calculated primarily is based on the standard of living of the parties post-marriage. If the spouse has any independent income of her own, that will be calculated. If there are any children, what their expenses are, that would be calculated. And then a sum would be arrived at. We also need to keep in mind that the way India views maintenance is that it is a necessity. It is not a luxury. So it is something that is given for your basic needs and essentials, and a little bit over and above that, just to ensure that you're not living a life of less than the dignity that you had previously. So that's the intent. It's not going to be like the West where you get this huge chunk of alimony or maintenance, as one would think.
I'm wondering about that. So a few things come to mind. What is the periodicity of the payment? Is this paid in perpetuity? Is there a finite amount of money that gets paid out? And also, is this adjusted for inflation, or is it a fixed amount that gets decided?
Okay, so there are two components to maintenance. You have what is known as an interim maintenance, that's during the pendency of your case, and then you have a final maintenance, which is your permanent alimony or maintenance, as it is viewed. Now, the interim maintenance will hold until your case is finally decided and disposed of. At the time of final hearing, you could be awarded maintenance in two ways. It could either be a lump sum or it could be a monthly payment. Now, unfortunately, inflation is not taken into account. In the event of changed circumstances, or you require more money, or let's say tomorrow the husband loses his job, both parties will have to go to court to agitate a claim under changed circumstances and say that, look, I either need more maintenance or I can't pay the maintenance that was previously awarded, and we need to revisit this entire structure.
Okay, and it's an important point that you make, because there are instances where, for legitimate reasons, a payment cannot be made. But is that taken into account by court? And in the event that a payment is wrongfully not made, what is the legal recourse that a party has?
Okay, so let me start with what happens if you withhold payments. Okay, the option available to, let's say, the wife in this case is to file what is known as a darkhast. A darkhast is sort of like an execution or recovery proceedings where she will go and say that the husband is in arrears of, let's say, 20 lakhs, 25 lakhs because he's been withholding payment for the last 3 months, 5 months, and so on. The husband, however, can fire back, or he can initiate be the first one to initiate proceedings, saying that, look, at the time when this order was passed, I was in a position to be able to give her 3 lakhs or 5 lakhs, whatever that amount was, as maintenance. However, I have now retired, or my position has changed, or I've lost my job, which is why I can no longer pay this kind of money, and we need to revisit this entire arrangement. Understand that that case also will have to be proved. Simply going and making a statement like this in court is not going to suffice. You will have to prove as the husband in terms of what has changed in your circumstances, why you can't pay anymore. And the wife will also then come back with her claim saying that, this may or may not be true because he does have savings and so on, and what her financial position is, if she has children, what are the ages of the children, and so on.
Okay, important points that are being made. Now, all of this comes to pass when there is obviously the reaching of a point where there is no common ground. And so therefore, understandably, parties have to split. But are more people contemplating prenuptial agreements, which, in case you're unfamiliar, viewer, has to do with an agreement between two parties before a marriage contract is gotten into? Is this, first of all, legally binding, Aditi?
So no, unfortunately, it is not. While you do have people who are opting for prenups, it is with the understanding that this is not enforceable. However, there's another way to look at prenups as well. It becomes beneficial for Indians who are now residing abroad and are married to either foreigners or married abroad. And given that, in most places in the West, you have a communal split in properties, a prenup would then help to kind of protect your interests in India in the event that you are initiating your divorce proceedings abroad.
Understood. Okay, now, since we've established that this prenuptial agreement is not legally binding, what I'm given to understand also is that it's an understanding between the two partners where they say if at some point we have to split, this is the way that we envision the split taking place. But having said that, in your considered opinion, what is the best outcome to seek? Because ultimately this is happening because there is no meeting of the minds, and you would want to have as clean a separation as possible. So what are the few things to bear in mind if, for example, an individual is in this kind of a situation? Right.
So I think at the get-go, I don't think prenup is the way to do it, because I think what happens is it's viewed as restricting your rights. Let's say today, as a husband might have 10 crore rupees, right? And the prenup has been drawn on out basis the 10 crore rupees, where the wife after a few years will get so much if the marriage lasts for so long, and so on and so forth, depending on how you've executed that agreement. But let's say tomorrow the husband has 100 crores. The wife may feel curtailed to an extent that, I don't think I only deserve 1 or 2 crores as was previously agreed, and I deserve more. So I think the ideal way to really go about it is having clarity of thought in terms of how, in the course of marriage, you're going to manage your finances. How, if your wife is a homemaker, you do something to ensure that even she feels secure, even she feels protected. Maybe you'll both have a common bank account where you transfer certain amount of monies per month, and you maintain a lifestyle which is fair and something that you can sustain even if you have to part ways tomorrow respectfully.
Last question, and this is in the event that one of the two parties is not playing fair, Aditi, and this often happens. How should somebody proceed in this kind of a situation? Because as you've pointed out, court cases can last years.
Absolutely. When people are not playing fair, though, unfortunately, what the intent is for the husband to deprive the wife of as much as he probably can, and for the wife to get as much of a settlement as possible. So the basis of that entire conversation is actually unfair to begin with. Unfortunately, then what happens is we need to obviously deploy tactics in terms of how the man would then protect his income and how the woman would then show that she is exceedingly dependent on him. That would involve, keeping evidence of their lifestyle in the course of marriage, what their electricity bills were, how often they ordered food online. So you will really have to go to the very basics as a woman to be able to prove that, I require this sum, which is equivalent to the standard of living I enjoy. Similarly, the man will have to show that, look, she's earning, she's capable of taking care of herself, she's educated, she has been involved in her work, in her business, and so on. And he will have to protect himself in some manner, which would also then maybe involve setting up a trust, protecting his assets, and so on.
Last question, and this has to do with a very critical aspect of marriages, which is children. And you've alluded to this at some point over the course of the conversation, but there is a question of custody. How is that determined, and how can a woman, in this case, protect her rights? Often, as I'm given to understand, please correct me if I'm wrong, the custody preference is to the mother.
So that's not entirely true.
Okay.
Custody goes to, while deciding the issue of custody, it's only the welfare of the child that's important, and that's what courts look at. Now they will try to analyze who the welfare of the child rests with. Is it with the mother or is it with the father? Obviously, given that, when children are up to 3, 5, 6 years of age, the mother is preferred because of their emotional needs and, other needs in general. But for whatever reason, if the father is able to prove that the mother is unfit or she is incapable of taking care of the child and the welfare really rests with him, the courts may consider awarding the custody of the child to the father.
And okay, the very last question. In your opinion, is this best decided between the parties themselves rather than letting it go to the court?
100%, right? Because when you go to court, you're actually airing dirty laundry in public. You have to make allegations against your spouse saying why he or she is an unfit parent. You'll bring up instances which may not necessarily be entirely true, which are obviously concocted, which also adds to a lot of emotional strain. You see children getting tutored because one parent will now start, showing that they are the more fit parent and start putting the other parent down. So the child is also then caught in this conundrum and is very, very emotionally scarred during this entire process. And when children are a little older, they can be called to court to be interviewed by the judge itself in deciding how the custody is going to work and who they prefer living with.
All right, thanks so much, Aditi, for joining in.